Hi everybody, welcome back. I am Tiffany with Voices for Independence Fitness and Activities, and I am here to share another recipe with you. I'm continuing my series on cooking across America, where I am making a stop in every state and recreating one of their most popular dishes. This morning we are stopping in Minnesota. When doing my research and trying to see what are popular dishes that people create and keep recreating for decades in each state, when I was looking at Minnesota, there were several great options. I decided to go with one of their dessert options. It was super popular for a very short amount of time, but it still stands with tradition till today. So this one doesn't have a really deep-seated history. It only dates back to the 80s. And it's actually called the Ediner Super Brownie. So the story has it there was this diner in Minnesota called Ediner's Diner. It was a retro diner designed to look like an old railroad car, as Minnesota was one of the many pass-throughs of the Intercontinental Railroad. So they wanted to recreate that feeling and recreate those old-time dishes. And one of them was this brownie recipe. And to this day, even though the Ediner Diner did branch off and had many franchise locations across Minnesota, it wasn't very long-lived, but the brownie recipe still holds true today, and a lot of people continue to recreate the Ediner brownie at home. So I'm going to go over the recipe with you. It's a little bit different than the traditional brownie recipe. Brownies actually were one of the very first things when I was a young kid that I started baking, probably at the age of 12. So I have one brownie recipe that I just love and I use all the time, but this one's really great. It seems like it has a little bit of a twist and that it will turn out delicious and super moist and dense. So what you're going to need for this is a 13 by 9 inch baking dish, so it makes a whole cake pan size portion of the brownies. And then we're going to need 1 cup of flour, which that way I know they're going to be ooey gooey delicious, because the recipe I traditionally use has more flour than that. So these are going to be really rich brownies. You need a teaspoon of baking powder, a touch of salt, and then we're going to be using some butter, some baking cocoa, sugar, eggs, vanilla, and then your optional pecans or walnuts. Now, for this, lots of recipes call for baking cocoa or cacao powder. This one actually calls for the solid form of unsweetened baking cocoa or baking chocolate. If you don't happen to have unsweetened baking chocolate in the bar form at home, don't worry, there's an easy substitution because I fall in that category. All you need to do is take your baking powder, and it's 3 tablespoons of your baking cocoa powder to 1 tablespoon of oil, whether it be vegetable oil, olive oil, coconut oil. So every 3 tablespoons and plus 1 tablespoon of oil equals 1 ounce of your baking chocolate. So that's what I did today. We need 5 ounces. So what you're going to do first is you are going to take your 1 stick plus a little bit more, like 2 tablespoons of butter, and we're going to melt that. Now you can either do it over a double boiler or you can do it in the microwave. I chose to do the microwave just because it's a little speedier and for convenience. And then I took my baking cocoa, mixed my oil in it already. So I have that step ready to go. So I have my butter melted and my baking cocoa already melted and mixed in as well. So then in a separate bowl, we're going to start our dry ingredients for these renowned brownies from Minnesota. So for this, we're going to take one cup of flour. Again, they use white all-purpose flour. So we're going to add 1 cup. I'm getting low on ingredients here. I'm going to have to hit up the store pretty soon. So I had about 1 cup left. Let me just put in this little bit here. Couldn't reach it in my measuring cup. So 1 cup of flour. And then we're going to be adding 2 cups of sugar to this. So these are going to be super sweet brownies, which is always a good thing in my eyes. You know, my little downfall is sugary sweets. I can stay away from the chips and snacks like that, but when it comes to baked goods, I need to control myself. I try not to keep them in the house for that exact reason. So I'm always making sure I give them away after I bake them. I took our apple cake from yesterday into our north office, and these will probably end up there as well. So there's our sugar. We just hit the bottom of both of our flour and sugar, so we'll need to restock on that. But we added our 2 cups of sugar, our 1 cup of flour to our dish here, and then we're going to add 1 teaspoon of our baking powder. So let me get that out. And again, it only takes a little bit of baking powder because brownies, unlike cakes, don't need to rise really high. They're more dense and gooey than light and fluffy like a cake. So we don't need much of that. And we're going to just stir our dry ingredients together. And then we'll be adding our chocolate and butter to this dry ingredients. And once we get the chocolate added, we'll add our eggs as well. This calls for 4 eggs for these brownies, and that's pretty typical for a brownie recipe as well. So we'll add our chocolate in. All our delicious melted chocolate is going to get mixed right into our sugar and flour. And then these actually have a chocolate icing that goes on top as well. So these are going to be very rich. So they will go a long way. You'll be able to serve a lot of people off your 1 pan of brownies. You don't need much to get your sugar fill for the day. So mix in your chocolate with your dry ingredients. It's going to turn into a thick batter consistency as it starts to thicken up, and seems like there's not enough wet ingredients to incorporate into all the dry ingredients. That's when you can start adding your eggs as well. So we'll add our eggs 1 at a time and start to mix them in to make sure they're entirely mixed into the batter. So you'll do your eggs 1 at a time, and again, there's 4. So take your time and make sure you mix them individually, to ensure that they're equally distributed throughout the batter as well. And with this, you're going to want to preheat your oven to 350 degrees, and these will be baking, I believe, for about 30 to 35 minutes. And we'll go over that again at the end of the recipe. So our 2 eggs, and as you're adding your eggs, your batter will start to thin out and become a little bit easier to work with. And then we'll add in our vanilla as our last ingredient before we put them in a lightly greased baking dish. So we'll add this one in as well. Now this recipe, although the restaurant it came from didn't last long and it's not that old, they must be delicious that they are in the top 10 dishes in Minnesota. So they must be a delicious recipe for not only being a couple decades old and still holding true and making the top 10 list. All right, so once your eggs are all incorporated, we're going to add our vanilla, and we're adding 2 teaspoons of vanilla to our brownie batter. And then we'll mix that in, and then we'll spread these evenly in our baking dish. And then I will go over the chocolate icing recipe with you as well. So add in your vanilla. We'll stir that in. Now it's really coming together. It looks delicious. And we're going to put this right in our baking dish. So I'll do that in a moment, but I want to go over the icing recipe with you as well before I share the recipe in the comments below. So remember, we're going to put that in the 13 by 9 inch baking dish, lightly greased. Make sure you put your batter in here, spread it out evenly, and that is going to go in a 350 degree oven. And we are baking that for 25 to 30 minutes. Remember, check on them and on the early side, because not all ovens cook evenly, so we don't want to over bake our brownies because they can get dry really quick. All right, so now for the chocolate icing, it's like a frosting, a very thin frosting. You are going to need, again, 2 more ounces of your unsweetened baking chocolate. If you don't have it, use the substitute, which is 3 tablespoons of the cocoa powder, to 1 tablespoon of oil equals 1 ounce of unsweetened baking chocolate in the bar form. So we have that here, and then I put my 1/3 cup of butter in here as well, and we melted it all down. So to this, we're gonna be adding 1/4 cup of coffee. I love this recipe already. So let me see if my 1/2 cup here, I'll just fill it halfway. So 1/4 cup of hot coffee. And if you don't have coffee, you don't drink coffee, you don't want that added caffeine, you can use a milk or you can even add water at this point as well. It's just a liquid to help thin it down, the icing down a little bit. And so I'm gonna stir that in. It might not seem like it's mixing in all the way because you have oil in the recipe already, so the butter and the water might not seem like it's mixing together. So give it a second, put a little elbow grease into it, and it'll eventually incorporate well into the butter and cocoa mixture you already have. So all we need to do now is add our sugar. What we're going to be adding here, instead of the white granulated sugar, we're going to be adding some powdered sugar. Let me grab mine from my little cupboard here. And we're going to be adding, let me just get your numbers right, 1.5 cups of powdered sugar for the icing that's going to go on top of these brownies. So I'm going to add in 1/2 cup at a time. I'm going to switch out my utensil, and I am going to use something else to mix with, because as it thickens up, it's going to get caught in our, where are all my spatulas? Oh, here's one. It's going to get caught in your whisk as the icing thickens up. So I'm switching and going to mix it in with a spatula. So I'm going to add just 1/2 cup at a time, because that powdered sugar I don't want flying all over my kitchen. Again, if you feel like it's getting too thick, you can cut back on the sugar a little bit. But I would definitely make sure you get at least your cup in there, or else you'll have more of a bitter, dark chocolate taste to your icing. And not everybody likes that. So we'll add the cup, and then it just calls for 1 more 1/2 cup to finish it off. Again, it's going to be more like a thin frosting. Icings are pretty thin already, almost as thin as a milk. But when you want to do this icing, it's going to be just shy of a frosting. Again, I'm mixing it in. I'll do my last 1/2 cup of required powdered sugar, and then I'll show you the consistency so you can see it. So it's going to go on thin, and then it will, once it comes back to room temperature, after you put it on your brownies, it will get a nice glistening, shiny coat to the top of your brownies. It'll look beautiful for presentation when you cut them and serve them for your dessert. So there you have it. We made our Ediner famous super brownies from Minnesota, the oh so popular recipe that even though the restaurant doesn't exist anymore, the recipe lives strong in Minnesota, and people still make them at home. And that's all there is to it. It's a beautiful icing to put on top of your decadent chocolate brownies that you just made. I'm hoping these turn out wonderful so I can share them with some of the Voices staff. And I will share the recipe in the comments below with you so you guys can recreate this at home yourselves. Thanks for joining me as I'm cooking across America. I stopped in Minnesota to check out the brownies, and I will be moving on and sharing another recipe later with you today. So stay tuned, and I'll see you soon. Have a great day.